Hey guys, before we begin tonight, I want to say a genuine thank you to the viewer who suggested this topic. You know who you are, and I want you to know that messages like yours are the reason this channel exists. Every time someone writes in with an idea that comes from a real place of curiosity or memory or love for a particular era, it shapes what we do here in a way I can never fully explain. So thank you, truly. And if the rest of you have topics you'd love to explore, drop them in the comments. I read every single one. If you haven't already, please take a second to like the video and subscribe. It costs you nothing and means everything to a small channel still finding its footing. And for those of you who prefer to listen on the go, the channel is now on Spotify. The link is in the description. Whether you're driving, folding laundry, or just lying in the dark pretending the world doesn't exist, you can find us there. Now, dim the lights if you can. Put a fan on if you have one. Pull something warm over your shoulders and get comfortable. Genuinely comfortable. The kind where you've already decided you're not moving for a while. Because tonight we're going somewhere specific. Somewhere that smelled like ivory soap and ironed cotton, and a pot roast that had been going since 9 in the morning. We're going to a place where the radio played softly in the kitchen, where the mail arrived at the same time every day, where the neighbours knew your name and the milkman knew your order. Have you ever wondered what a Tuesday morning actually felt like inside a 1950s American home? What it sounded like when the wringer washer was running and the kids were still at school and the house was almost quiet? What it felt like to stand at a kitchen sink for the 4th time in a single day, looking out a window at a backyard you'd swept just that morning? What it meant to take pride in something no one was ever going to thank you for? What it cost, in time and energy and quiet personal sacrifice, to make a home look the way those homes looked? Because the 1950s American housewife is one of the most mythologized figures in our entire cultural memory. We picture her in a shirtwaist dress with her hair set just so, smiling serenely over a perfectly arranged casserole. We picture the pastel kitchen, the gleaming floors, the table set for dinner like a magazine spread. We picture ease, grace, effortlessness. But behind that picture was something else entirely. Something exhausting, complicated, surprisingly physical, and in its own quiet way, profoundly human. And just like that, it is 1953. The coffee is already on. Someone down the street is pushing a lawnmower. The morning light is coming through the kitchen curtains in long, pale stripes. The day has already begun, and you're already behind. It is not yet 6 o'clock, and you're already standing in the kitchen. The rest of the house is still sleeping, a soft, suspended quiet that will last maybe another 40 minutes if you're lucky, and you have learned to treat that quiet like a resource, something finite, something not to be wasted. The linoleum is cool under your feet. The percolator is doing its slow, bubbling work on the stove. Through the window above the sink, the sky is just beginning to go pale at the edges, and in the stillness of that early hour, before the children need anything, before your husband needs anything, before the day fully opens its eyes and starts making demands, this is the closest thing you have to time that belongs to you. You use it carefully. You stand at the counter with your coffee and you drink it while it is still hot, which will not be possible once the morning properly begins. The cup is the everyday one, not the good china, just a plain white ceramic cup that fits comfortably in both hands, and you hold it that way, with both hands, because the kitchen is cool and the warmth of it is pleasant against your palms. Outside, a bird is doing something in the maple tree in the backyard. A car passes slowly on the street. The first one of the morning, someone on their way to an early shift somewhere. The world is assembling itself for another day, and you are watching it happen from your kitchen window in the particular piece of someone who got there first. This hour is when you organise the day in your mind. Not with a list, though you keep lists, small practical ones, on the notepad by the telephone, but in a different way, a kind of quiet internal mapping of what needs to happen, and in what order and where the pressure points are likely to be. You know that Tuesday means ironing after the breakfast dishes are done. You know that your youngest has a dentist appointment at 2, and that the car will need gas before then. You know that the ground beef in the icebox should be used today, and that there is not quite enough flour for both the biscuits and the thing you are planning to make for dessert, which means the grocery run cannot wait until Thursday. All of this moves through your mind while the percolator finishes and the sky outside continues its slow brightening. It is not worry exactly, it is closer to navigation. A continuous low-level reading of the household's coordinates, an awareness of where things stand and where they need to go, and you've been doing it for long enough that it happens almost without effort, the way breathing happens, automatic and necessary and largely invisible to everyone around you. By 5:45 you have already done several things that no one will notice. You have checked that the children's lunches can be made from what is in the house. You have moved a load of yesterday's laundry from the basket to a place where you will not forget it. You have looked at the calendar on the wall by the refrigerator and confirmed what you already knew, that Thursday has company coming, which means Wednesday needs to be spent differently than you had planned. You refill your cup. There is a particular quality to the light at this hour, a softness that the day will not hold on to for long. By the time your husband comes downstairs, the sun will be up, and the kitchen will be fully awake, filled with the smell of toast and the sound of children and the ordinary busy noise of a household in motion. But right now the light is still tentative, still pale and gentle, coming through the curtains in thin lines that fall across the kitchen floor in a way that is, if you let yourself see it, quietly beautiful. You do not always let yourself see it. There are mornings when this hour is just the hour before everything starts, when you're too tired or too preoccupied to register anything beyond the tasks accumulating in the front of your mind. But on the mornings when you can receive it for what it is, there is something here worth noticing. A stillness that belongs to no one else. A moment before the day makes any claim on you at all. Upstairs, someone shifts in a bed. A small sound, a murmur, the creak of a mattress settling. Not awake yet. You have a few more minutes. You finish your coffee. You rinse the cup and set it on the drain board. You take the orange juice from the icebox and set it on the counter to take the chill off. You pull the bread from the box and check how much is left. You're already thinking about breakfast, already half inside the next hour of the morning, but some small part of you is still standing at the window, watching the sky go from pale grey to the first thin wash of gold, grateful, in a way you would not necessarily say out loud, for this quiet, for this stillness, for these few ordinary minutes that are in the economy of your days, something close to a luxury. Then footsteps on the stairs, and the day begins. Breakfast in a 1950s household is not a quiet cup of coffee, and whatever you can find in the refrigerator. It is a production. It is eggs scrambled or fried, or turned into something more ambitious. Toast made under a broiler that requires watching. Orange juice squeezed by hand if you are the kind of household that does things properly. Oatmeal on cold mornings, cream of wheat when the budget is tighter than usual, and all of it timed to land on the table at the exact moment your husband needs to leave and your children need to be at the bus stop, which are 2 different times, in 2 different directions, with 2 completely different sets of requirements. Your husband takes his eggs a specific way, and you know that the way you know his coffee order and the way he likes his shirt collar, which is to say without having to think about it anymore, the knowledge worn smooth from repetition until it sits somewhere below conscious thought. 2 eggs, over easy, not runny but not firm, with the whites fully set and the yolk still soft enough to break with the corner of a piece of toast. You have made this egg approximately 900 times, and you can judge its doneness now by the way the white looks around the edges, and by the way the yolk moves when you tilt the pan, a small, slight tremor that tells you it is exactly right. The children are a different negotiation entirely. One of them will eat what is put in front of them without complaint, which you have come to understand is a gift, something not to be taken for granted. The other has opinions, strong ones, about the texture of oatmeal, about whether the toast is too dark, about the orange pulp, about the way the eggs smell this morning for reasons that cannot be identified or resolved. You manage this with the particular patience of someone who has learned that the morning is not the time to have the larger conversation, that the goal is simply to get food into everyone's body and everyone out the door at the correct time, and that the larger conversation can, if necessary, happen later. While the eggs are going, you are also making toast. The broiler requires your attention in the specific, relentless way that anything requiring your attention at 6:45 in the morning requires it, which is to say it punishes even a brief lapse. You have burned more toast than you would care to count, not from carelessness, but from the simple arithmetic of trying to do 4 things at once in a kitchen that is not large enough to have eyes in the back of your head. You have learned to stand close, to watch it, to pull it the moment the edges go gold, before the centre catches up, because the centre will catch up faster than you expect. The table needs setting before the food is ready, which means you're moving between the stove and the cupboard and the table in a rhythm that looks, from the outside, like something choreographed. Plates, glasses, forks, napkins, the butter dish, the jam, the small pitcher of orange juice that you pour from the larger container because the large container is too unwieldy for the table. Your youngest trails into the kitchen in pyjamas, hair flattened on one side from sleep, and climbs into their chair without speaking. Your husband comes down in his work clothes, straightens his cuffs, pours his own coffee because you have your hands full, and sits down at the head of the table in the way he does every morning. A gesture so habitual it has become part of the room's furniture. By 7 o'clock everyone has eaten. The plates are not clean, there are always remnants. The edge of toast a child decided not to finish. The last 2 bites of egg that somehow never get eaten. The ring left by the orange juice glass. Your husband is pulling on his jacket and checking his watch and saying something about what time he thinks he'll be home, and you're already carrying dishes to the sink because the window between breakfast ending and the children needing to leave for the bus is narrow, and the kitchen will not clean itself, and if you do not start it now, you will be behind before the morning has properly found its footing. The door closes. The house is briefly, blessedly quieter. You have 40 minutes before the bus comes and the sink is full. You roll up your sleeves. Monday is for washing. Tuesday is for ironing. Wednesday is for mending and marketing. Thursday is for deep cleaning. Friday is for baking. Saturday is for whatever the week left undone. Sunday is for church and the kind of cooking that takes most of the afternoon. This is not a suggestion. This is a structure, passed down from your mother and her mother before her, a rhythm so deeply embedded in the week that deviating from it feels less like a choice and more like a small act of chaos. And chaos, in a household this size with this many moving parts, is not something you can afford. The schedule exists because someone worked out through long accumulated experience that a house does not stay clean on its own, and that the work of keeping it runs most smoothly when it is distributed across the week in predictable portions rather than allowed to pile up until it becomes something overwhelming. Your mother kept this schedule. Your neighbours keep versions of it. The women's magazines confirm it, dress it up in cheerful language about efficient homemaking, present it as the sensible architecture of a well-ordered domestic life. And it is sensible. That is the part that no one who has not run a household fully appreciates. The schedule is not arbitrary. It reflects the actual physics of the work. Washing on Monday means the laundry is done before the week builds up more of it. Ironing on Tuesday means the clean clothes are pressed and ready before the week needs them. Thursday's deep cleaning means the house is at its best going into the weekend. when your husband is home and company is more likely to call. Friday's baking means fresh bread and a dessert for Sunday, with enough time to correct any mistakes. Each day links to the next in a chain of cause and effect that, when it runs properly, produces a household that appears effortlessly maintained. The word effortlessly is doing a great deal of work in that sentence, because the schedule, however logically constructed, still has to be executed by a single person moving through a house that is continuously generating more work in every direction. The children track mud through the kitchen that was clean an hour ago. The bathroom you scrubbed Thursday morning needs attention again by Saturday. Dust accumulates on surfaces regardless of when they were last wiped, and the kitchen produces dishes in a rhythm so steady it begins to feel almost biological, as though the house itself has a metabolism. You work within the schedule and around its edges simultaneously. You follow it because it is the most functional way to manage the volume of work, and you adapt it constantly, quietly, without announcing the adaptation, shifting Thursday's deep clean to accommodate a child's illness, or moving the market into Friday because Wednesday's schedule got swallowed by something that could not wait. The schedule is the framework. You are the intelligence that keeps it working when the framework meets actual life. By Thursday afternoon, when you're on your hands and knees with a scrub brush working along the baseboards of the hallway, or moving the furniture in the living room to get the vacuum beneath it, or washing down the kitchen walls because it is the kind of task that only reveals its necessity. When you have the time to look closely, the work is as physical as anything that happens in a factory or a field. Your back knows it. Your hands know it. And yet it happens inside a house, behind a closed door, with no one watching and no time card to punch, which means it will not be counted in the ledger of 1950s American productivity as work at all. The schedule keeps going regardless. Monday will come again. Before the automatic washing machine became something a middle-class family could reasonably expect to own, laundry in a 1950s household was a physical undertaking that occupied most of a Monday. The wringer washer stood in the basement or the utility room, or in some houses right there in the kitchen, a round tub with a motor that agitated the water and two rollers up top that you fed the wet clothes through by hand, guiding each piece carefully, mindful of your fingers, watching the water press out in a flat sheet as the garment emerged on the other side, limp and heavy, ready for the rinse tub and then the line. You sorted the laundry the night before, or early Monday morning before the children were awake, because sorting took longer than people imagined and because the order of the washing mattered. Whites first, while the water was clean and hot, then the lighter colours, then the darks, then the work clothes and the things that had been closest to the actual dirt of the week. Your husband's work shirts with their collar grime, the children's play clothes with their grass stains and mud that you had already treated the night before with a bar of Fell's naphtha soap and a brush, working the stain out by hand before it had a chance to set any further into the fabric. The water in the tub was as hot as you could make it, because hot water cleaned. That was simply a fact, and cold water was for rinsing. You added the soap, powdered or in a bar depending on what you had, and the agitator went to work. The sound of it filled the room, a low, churning mechanical rhythm that you came to associate so completely with Monday morning that years later you would hear a similar sound and feel the faint pull of that day, that room, that particular weight of wet laundry in your hands. Feeding the clothes through the wringer required a focused kind of attention. You guided each piece slowly, keeping your fingers back from the rollers, watching the fabric compress and the water stream down into the tub below. A button fed in wrong could crack or catch. A piece of clothing bunched at the wrong angle would jam the rollers and require you to reverse them and start again. Your mother had caught her hand once, years ago, and though it had not been serious, the story stayed with you as a reminder that the machine, for all its helpfulness, required respect. Rinsing happened in a separate tub, sometimes twice, because soap left in the fabric went stiff and dingy over time, and you took pride in your laundry coming off the line bright and clean smelling, not grey, not stiff, not smelling of anything other than air and sunlight. That pride was not vanity. It was a standard, and it was your standard. And it was one of the ways the quality of your household expressed itself to the world, in the same way a well-kept front porch or a properly set table did. The line stretched across the backyard, and hanging the laundry had its own logic. Shirts hung by the tail so the shoulders dried smooth. Sheets pinned at the corners to catch the wind without dragging. Your husband's work trousers hung by the waistband, never the cuffs, because the cuffs needed to fall free and dry without a crease in the wrong place. You worked down the basket with efficient movements, reaching and pinning, turning to take the next piece, the wooden pins smooth in your fingers from years of handling. In good weather, the line was one of the quieter pleasures of the week. The laundry moved in the breeze, the yard smelled clean. By afternoon, if the sun cooperated, you could bring it in dry and warm from the line, and that warmth, folded into the fabric, stayed in the clothes until they were put away, a small sensory kindness the dryer would never quite replicate. But weather did not always cooperate, and on those Mondays the laundry came inside on a wooden drying rack, or was strung on lines in the basement, and the house took on a particular damp smell that meant the week had started harder than expected, and that Tuesday's ironing would take longer, and that some things would need a second press in because they had dried without enough air moving round them. The washing was finished by early afternoon, if everything went according to plan. There is a particular smell to ironing, starch and steam and hot cotton that is so specific to this era that a single encounter with it decades later can collapse the distance between then and now in an instant. In a 1950s household, ironing is not a chore you do occasionally when something looks particularly wrinkled. It is a standing appointment with Tuesday afternoon, a several-hour commitment that encompasses your husband's shirts, your children's school clothes, the household linens, the tablecloth, and in some households even the sheets, which are ironed flat and pressed smooth before being returned to beds that will rumple them again by morning. The ironing board goes up in the kitchen or the living room, wherever you can work with enough space to move and enough light to see what you're doing. You fill the sprinkle bottle, a glass bottle fitted with a perforated cap, and dampen the clothes that have been waiting in a rolled bundle since you brought them in from the line or the drying rack. Dampening is not optional. Dry cotton fights the iron. Cotton with just the right amount of moisture pressed into it yields under the heat with a satisfying give, and the result, a shirt smooth and flat and holding the faint warm smell of starch, is immediately legible as something that was done properly. Your husband's shirts take the most time and the most care. You begin with the collar, pressing it on both sides, paying particular attention to the points, which have a tendency to curl if you rush them or let the iron sit too long in one spot. Then the cuffs, inside and out, folded back over the board's narrow end to get the edges flat. Then the sleeves, one at a time, smoothed with your free hand before the iron passes over them, watching for any gatherings in the fabric that would leave a ridge. Then the body of the shirt, the back first because it is the largest surface, then the front panels, working carefully around the buttons, tilting the iron's point into the space beside each one. A shirt done this way looks like something. It looks like a person who is taken care of. And in 1955, a man's shirt is one of the visible signals of a household that is being run with competence and attention, and you know this, and you iron accordingly. The children's clothes are faster, but no less important. A blouse with a collar that has not been pressed reads, in the social grammar of a 1950s school, as a small failure, and you're not interested in sending your children out into the world wearing your failures however minor, however invisible to anyone who has not been trained to read such things. So the blouse gets pressed. The boys' school trousers get creased down the front, a crease sharp enough to hold through a day of sitting at a desk and running at recess and the bus ride home. The linens are a different kind of satisfaction. Pillowcases ironed, smooth and folded in thirds feel when you stack them in the linen closet like something completed. The tablecloth pressed flat and hung carefully over the closet shelf so it does not recrease before Sunday is a small act of forward planning. These are the kinds of tasks that no one will comment on and everyone would notice the absence of, and you have made your peace, mostly, with that particular arithmetic. By the time the board comes down and the iron is unplugged and set to cool on its metal rest, the afternoon is well past the middle. Your shoulders are tight from the sustained posture of ironing, the slight lean forward, the repeated reaching and smoothing. Your feet have been on the hard kitchen floor for 2 hours, but the pile of finished clothes hanging neatly from the backs of chairs or folded on the table is something concrete, something done, something that will hold its shape until it is worn and then returned to you to do again. You do not resent the ironing exactly. Some weeks it is almost meditative, a task with clear parameters and visible results that makes a welcome contrast to the kinds of housework that feel endless and self-erasing. Other weeks it is simply another 2 hours of Tuesday, but either way the shirts will be pressed, the collars will lie flat, the crease in the trousers will hold. Because that is the standard, and it is your standard, and you have kept it every week for as long as you have had a household to keep. Going to the grocery store in 1955 is not what it will become. There is no warehouse lit like a stadium, no cart large enough to hold a week's worth of food for a family of 5, no frozen meals stacked ceiling high in long humming aisles. The store you go to is smaller, quieter, arranged with a logic that feels almost personal. The butcher knows your name. The man behind the counter at the deli knows your husband prefers his bologna sliced thin. You bring a list written in your own careful handwriting, a list you have been composing in your head since yesterday, and you work through it methodically, thinking about the week ahead, about what is in the icebox, about what is on sale, about what your children will actually eat versus what you wish they would eat. The store smells of sawdust on the floor near the produce and cold meat from the direction of the butcher's case, and something sweet and faintly chemical from the baking aisle, where the cake mixes live in their cheerful pastel boxes. These smells are familiar to you in the way the smells of your own kitchen are familiar, absorbed into the background of ordinary life until they only become noticeable when they change or disappear. You've been coming to this store every Wednesday for years. You know where everything is. You know which shelf holds the brand of canned tomatoes you prefer, and which holds the one your mother-in-law recommends, and you know which one you buy when no one is paying attention. The produce is near the front, and you take your time here, pressing the tomatoes gently, checking the skin of the apples, lifting the ears of corn to look at the silk. There is a way to do this that is efficient, and a way to do it that is theatrical, and most women navigate somewhere between the two, moving with purpose but pausing for the assessment that is, in 1955, still something you do with your own judgment rather than a label on a bag. The greengrocer, if this store has one, might have an opinion about the peaches this week. You take the opinion under advisement. At the butcher counter, you tell him what you need and he cuts it for you, wrapping each piece in white paper and marking it in grease pencil with a simplicity that feels almost ceremonial. You are buying meat for the week and you know your budget and you know which cuts will carry furthest. The chuck roast that can go in the pot with vegetables and become 2 dinners if you're careful. The chicken that will stretch into a soup once the carcass has been used. The ground beef that is flexible and forgiving, and your youngest preferred argument for dinner. The butcher wraps everything, and you put it in your basket and move on. the grocery store is also, and this is something that does not appear on the list, a social occasion. You'll see at least 2 women you know. You will exchange the particular conversation of women who run neighbouring households, a conversation that operates on several levels at once, practical on the surface and something warmer underneath. You talk about the price of butter, which has gone up again, and about the new product on the end cap that neither of you has tried yet, and about someone's husband's back and someone else's children, and whether the weather is going to hold through the weekend. You do not hurry these conversations even when your list is only half finished. They are part of the errand in a way that is hard to explain to anyone who was not there. Part of the fabric of a Wednesday in a 1950s American town, and you move through them with the ease of someone who has long understood that the errands of domestic life are not separate from community but woven through it. Each one an occasion for the small, genuine human contact that keeps a neighbourhood feeling like a neighbourhood rather than simply a collection of houses. By the time you reach the register, your basket is full and your list is complete, or very nearly so, with 1 or 2 substitutions noted mentally for adjustments later in the week. The total is tallied by hand. You count out your money carefully. The bag boy packs everything into paper bags, and you carry them to the car, or if you have walked, you carry them home. 2 bags balanced against your body, your list tucked into your coat pocket, the week's meals already beginning to assemble themselves in the planning part of your mind. Wednesday has begun well. In a 1950s household where the budget is fixed, and the expectations for the table are high, meal planning is not a hobby or a wellness practice. It is a form of applied mathematics conducted entirely in your own head, while also watching a toddler and listening for the dryer and remembering that your husband mentioned company might be coming Thursday. You know the price of a pound of ground beef to the penny. You know which nights can sustain a casserole made mostly from pantry staples, and which nights require something that looks like more effort than it was. The pantry is the foundation of all of this. You keep it with a consistency that borders on the devotional, restocking before things run out rather than after, rotating the cans so the oldest ones are always at the front, noting on a small piece of paper tucked inside the door what needs to be replaced on Wednesday's marketing trip. This is not obsessive. This is how you ensure that Thursday's dinner can be made from what is already in the house, even if Wednesday's grocery run gets interrupted, which it sometimes does, by a child who needs collecting or weather that turns before you finish, or a conversation at the store that runs longer than expected. The logic of meal planning in this era operates around protein, which is the most expensive component of any meal, and therefore the one that requires the most strategic thinking. The chuck roast bought on Wednesday becomes Sunday's dinner and Monday's hash. The chicken that went into the pot on Tuesday comes out as soup by Thursday, with noodles added and the carcass long since reduced to a rich stock that you have strained and stored in a jar in the icebox. Ground beef stretches into a meatloaf large enough for dinner and a cold sandwich the next day, or into a sauce for pasta that feeds the children twice if you make enough. Nothing is wasted in a household that is paying attention. Side dishes are where you have more flexibility and you use it. Vegetables follow what the season is offering and what the market had on sale, and you are skilled at making a simple thing taste like more than it is. Carrots glazed in butter and brown sugar become something a child might actually request. A potato, baked long and slow until the skin is crisp and the inside is floury and tender, needs almost nothing and costs almost nothing and is somehow exactly right beside a piece of meat on a cold evening. These are not elaborate techniques. They are the accumulated practical knowledge of someone who's been feeding a family long enough to understand that good food is less about expensive ingredients than about attention. The challenge sharpens in the last few days before payday, when the budget has been fully committed and the pantry is doing most of the work. This is when the eggs earn their place in the weekly rotation, not just as a breakfast item but as a dinner, a frittata with whatever vegetables are left, or a plate of fried eggs with toast, which the children receive with more enthusiasm than you might expect, and your husband accepts without complaint because he married someone who knows how to manage a household, and he has always understood, at some level, what that management involves. Friday's baking is the place where the budget becomes something else entirely. Becomes something that smells like abundance even when the week has been lean. The bread you bake costs a fraction of what the bakery charges, and it comes out of your oven warm and smelling of something that is not efficiency, but is unmistakably home. The pie or the cake or the batch of cookies made for the weekend requires flour and sugar and butter, all of which you have because you planned for them, and it produces something that sits on the counter and tells everyone who walks through the kitchen that this is a household where the ordinary has been taken seriously. That seriousness is invisible in the finished meal. It is meant to be. The roast arrives on the table looking like a roast, not like 3 days of planning and 2 days of strategic use. The soup tastes like soup, not like the calculation behind it. The budget that governed every decision from Wednesday's marketing to Saturday's substitutions leaves no trace on the plates or in the faces of the people eating from them. That invisibility is, in its own way, the measure of success. The school bus deposits your children at the end of the block at 3:27, and from that moment forward the texture of the afternoon changes entirely. Where the morning had a kind of purposeful solitude to it, the hours after 3 are a different landscape altogether, louder, more unpredictable, more demanding of your presence in a way that is different from the physical demands of cleaning and cooking. Your children need a snack, and they need to tell you about their day, and they need help with homework, and they need to be redirected away from the television, and they need you to adjudicate a dispute about something that happened at recess 3 weeks ago that apparently still requires resolution. The snack is ready before they arrive, because children at 3:30 in the afternoon are not at their most patient, and the gap between the school bus and whatever mood they have carried home is best bridged quickly, with something in their hands. A glass of milk, a plate of graham crackers, an apple cut into slices because a whole apple is, for reasons you've never fully been able to explain, less appealing to a child than the same apple rendered into pieces. You have the plate on the table and the milk poured before the back door opens, and they come in trailing their school bags and their noise and the particular atmospheric disturbance that accompanies children who have been sitting still all day and are now emphatically not sitting still. The telling of the day happens in layers. The first layer is the surface report. Who said what at lunch? What happened in gym? The grade on the spelling test that was either better or worse than expected. You listen to this while washing the morning's last dishes or beginning the early stages of dinner. A pot of water on to boil, vegetables pulled from the icebox, something measured out while your attention divides itself between the task in your hands and the voice coming from the kitchen table. This is a skill you have developed to a considerable degree, the ability to be genuinely present for a conversation while your hands continue working, because the alternative, the full stopping of all domestic momentum to sit and listen, is something the afternoon schedule cannot always absorb. The homework hour is more demanding. Your older child manages most of it independently, coming to you with specific questions rather than general assistance, which you privately consider a good development. Your younger one needs more, needs you to sit alongside them through the arithmetic worksheet, to read the instructions aloud, to offer the kind of patient encouragement that is hardest to summon on the days when you have been on your feet since before 6, and the kitchen is not done, and dinner needs to be on the table in 2 hours. On those days, you summon it anyway. There is a particular kind of tiredness that belongs to late afternoon in a house with children, a tiredness that is different from the physical weariness of the morning's work. It is a tiredness of constant availability, of being the person in the room who is always reachable, always the one to whom questions and complaints and requests are addressed, always on in a way that has no natural breakpoint built into it. Your husband will come home and the day will shift again, the household reconstituting itself around his presence. But in these hours between the bus and dinner time, you are the whole of it. The television is a negotiation. You allow it after homework for a limited time, with the understanding that it ends before dinner without argument, an understanding that holds roughly 60% of the time and requires active enforcement the other 40%. You do not resent the television. It buys you an hour in the kitchen where the background noise is manageable, and your children are, if not quiet, at least contained, and in the economy of the afternoon, that hour is worth something. By 5 o'clock the homework is done, the snack dishes are washed, the television has been turned off after the expected negotiation, and the children are somewhere in the house, engaged in something that is, you believe, reasonably wholesome and not likely to require your intervention in the next 20 minutes. You are at the stove. Something good is beginning to smell like something. The afternoon has been absorbed into the evening, the way afternoons in this kind of house always are, not with a clear ending but with a gradual shift, the day's demands changing character without ever fully releasing you. Somewhere down the street, a car turns into a driveway. The neighbourhood is bringing itself home. Dinner will be ready at 6. In a 1950s American household, dinner at 6 o'clock is not a goal. It is a covenant. It is the organising principle around which the entire second half of the day is arranged. The point toward which the afternoon's chopping and simmering and timing and tasting has been building since roughly 4 in the afternoon. Your husband's arrival home is the signal that the day's domestic arc is reaching its appointed end, and the table should be set, the food should be ready, and you should look, if not precisely fresh, then at least composed, because the dinner table is where the family comes together, and the dinner table is, in ways both spoken and unspoken, a reflection of you. The preparation for dinner begins earlier than anyone at the table will ever know. The roast that goes in the oven at 4 has been in your mind since Wednesday at the grocery store. The vegetable simmering in the pot on the back burner was prepped during the lull after the children left for school, diced and left in a bowl of water so it would be ready when the afternoon demanded your attention elsewhere. The pie cooling on the counter was made yesterday, because Friday is baking day, and the pie was planned to last through the weekend, and because there is a satisfaction in having dessert already finished when the dinner itself is still in progress. A small victory of forward planning that no one will see, but that you will know about. You time everything by the sound of the street. The children coming home from school tells you it is 3:30. The neighbour's dog barking at the mail carrier tells you it is 4. The shift in the light through the kitchen window, the way it goes from afternoon gold to something lower and longer, tells you it is getting on toward 5, and you begin the final stage of dinner assembly with the particular focused attention of someone landing an aircraft. The potatoes go in. The bread, if there is bread, goes into the oven to warm. The table has been set since 5:15. The good enough dishes tonight, not the china but not the everyday either, because Tuesday warrants something between the two. When the door opens at 6 or close to it, the smell that greets your husband at the threshold is not accidental. You have been managing it in the way you manage most things, without making the management visible. The kitchen smells of whatever is best about what you made, and the living room is straightened, and the children are clean if not entirely calm, and you're standing at the stove with a dish towel over your shoulder, and an expression that says everything is under control, because everything is under control, because you made it so starting at 4 o'clock and working without pause. Dinner itself is its own performance. Not theatrical, not effortful in any way that shows, but structured in the way that 1950s domestic life is structured, with an awareness of how things look and feel and what they communicate. The food should be plentiful enough that no one leaves the table hungry, but not so excessive that it suggests poor management of resources. The conversation should be smooth, the kind that moves easily between the day's events and the children's school news and whatever your husband wants to talk about, and you are the one who keeps it moving, who redirects when it stalls, who pulls the quiet child in and gently manages the loud one. By 7 o'clock the plates are cleared, the children are excused. Your husband settles into his chair with the newspaper or the television, and you return to the kitchen for the last round of the day, the washing up, the wiping down, the putting away of what was just used, the returning of the kitchen to the state it needs to be in for tomorrow morning's early beginning. Somewhere in the country right now, in 1,000 kitchens just like yours, the same thing is happening. The 6 o'clock dinner, the cleared table, the quiet afterward. The kitchen cleaned for the 3rd time today. The covenant kept as it is every evening without ceremony or acknowledgement. Just kept. Somewhere between finishing the afternoon's housework and getting dinner on the table, you're expected to have also refreshed yourself. Changed out of the house dress you wore through the cleaning and the cooking. Done something with your hair. Put on a fresh blouse or a simple dress, something that does not have a flour smudge on the front or smell of bleach from the bathroom tiles you scrubbed that morning. This is not a formal requirement written anywhere. No one will say anything if you do not manage it, but everyone will notice in the particular way that 1950s American domesticity tracks such things, and the noticing carries its own quiet pressure. The house dress is the uniform of the working hours, a garment designed for practicality rather than presentation, cotton, easy to launder, loose enough to move in, the kind of thing you would not answer the front door wearing if you had any advance notice. It is held up through the morning and the afternoon, and the particular indignities of a day spent in close contact with cleaning products and cooking smells and the general physical demands of the household, and it has done its job well. But it is not dinner attire. Dinner attire is the fresh dress, the ironed blouse, the clothes that say you have been somewhere other than your own floor all day even when you have not. You change quickly, in the 10 or 15 minutes you have carved out of the 5 o'clock hour, with the particular efficiency of someone who has learned to do everything quickly, because there is always something else waiting. The dress you put on was laid out this morning, or pressed on Tuesday, a small act of advance planning that saves you the 3 minutes you would otherwise spend at the closet, making a decision you do not currently have the mental resources to make. You brush your hair or reset the pin that came loose during the afternoon. You touch up your lipstick in the bathroom mirror, a brief, practiced gesture. Because lipstick in this era is not optional, not entirely, not if you're the kind of woman who takes her household seriously, and you are. The transformation is minor in purely physical terms. You're wearing different clothes. Your hair is marginally tidier. Your face has been briefly attended to. But the effect of it is something larger than its components, because what the fresh dress and the lipstick communicate to your husband when he comes through the door, and to the children who will spend the evening noticing everything without understanding what they are noticing, and to the neighbour who might stop by for something she borrowed last week, is that you have not been defeated by the day, that you have moved through 12 hours of relentless physical and logistical labour, and emerged from it still composed, still yourself, still the woman who runs this household with something that looks, from the outside, like ease. The performance of effortlessness is its own kind of labour, and like most of the labour you do, it is invisible precisely because it is done well. If you had not changed your dress, the day would show on you, and the day is not supposed to show. That is the standard. Absorbed so completely it no longer feels like a standard, just like the truth of how things are done. What the magazines never quite say, though they imply it in every image of a smiling woman in a pressed shirtwaist, is how the time for this was found. Not made, found. extracted from an afternoon that had no spare moments in it, through a combination of forward planning and the particular kind of fatigue management that comes from spending years learning which corners can be cut without consequence and which cannot. The ironing was done on Tuesday, so the dress was ready. The lipstick was on the bathroom counter, because it is always on the bathroom counter. The children knew not to interrupt the 5 o'clock window because they have learned, in the wordless way children learn the architecture of their household, that 5 o'clock is not a time for new requests. You come downstairs at 5:15, dinner in progress on the stove, smelling not of bleach or effort, but of whatever good thing is cooking, wearing a dress that is not wrinkled, with your hair as it should be. The house is composed. You are composed, and in 20 minutes, when the door opens and the day begins its final movement, no one who enters this kitchen will have any clear understanding of what it cost to make it look this way. That too is part of the work. The kitchen in a 1950s home is never really finished with you. You clean it after breakfast and begin lunch preparations, and you clean it again and begin dinner preparations, and you clean it a third time after the dishes are done and the leftovers are wrapped and the counters are wiped down and the dish towel is hung to dry. And then sometime around midnight, a child wants a glass of water and the kitchen receives you again in the dark. It is the room that asks the most and thanks you the least, and yet it is also, somehow, the room at the centre of everything, the warm, fragrant heart of the house around which all the rest of daily life quietly orbits. The kitchen is the first room you enter in the morning and the last room you leave at night, and in the hours between those two moments it receives you so many times, for so many different purposes, that it becomes something more than a room. It becomes a kind of relationship, demanding and sustaining in equal measure, the place where the family's physical life is produced and maintained and produced again. The percolator lives on the counter beside the stove. The bread box sits near the window. The icebox hums its steady note in the corner. These things are as familiar to you as the faces of your children, and you move among them with the fluid competence of someone who has internalized the geometry of the space so completely that you could work it in the dark and occasionally do. The sounds of the kitchen are their own language. The particular hiss of butter hitting a pan tells you the heat is right. The way the percolator shifts from bubbling to a slower, deeper sound tells you the coffee is done without your having to check. The lid of a pot beginning to rattle tells you the water has reached a boil. You have learned to read these sounds the way a musician reads a score, translating them into action without conscious thought, adjusting the flame or lifting the lid or turning the bread in the oven on the basis of what you hear as much as what you see. The smells accumulate through the day in layers. Coffee in the morning, then toast, then the particular clean smell of soapy water as the breakfast dishes are washed. By noon, something savoury is underway. Onions softening in a pan or a pot of soup beginning to build its slow depth on the back burner. By late afternoon, the kitchen smells of the evening meal, and this smell drifts through the rest of the house in a way that is not incidental. It is a signal. It tells everyone in the household that dinner is coming, that the day is moving toward its appointed end, that the woman in the kitchen has it in hand. The counters tell a story of the day's progress in reverse. In the morning they're clear, clean from last night's final wipe down, empty and ready for what the day will ask of them. By noon there is evidence of lunch, a board with breadcrumbs, a jar left open, a bowl waiting to be washed. By 4 in the afternoon the counter has become a workspace, vegetables in various stages of preparation, a measuring cup set to one side, the mixing bowl that needed to be used for something and has not yet been returned to the cabinet. By 7 in the evening, after dinner and the washing up, the counter is clear again, wiped smooth, the dish towel hung straight on its bar, and the kitchen has been returned to its neutral state, ready to begin the cycle again at 6 tomorrow morning. This cycle is the heartbeat of the house. It does not stop for illness or tiredness, or the kind of day that leaves you with nothing to spare. It accommodates and adapts, becomes simpler when it needs to, scales back to soup and bread, and an early bedtime when the household needs that kind of mercy, but it does not stop. The kitchen does not allow for stopping. The family needs to eat, and the dishes need washing, and the counter needs wiping, and the morning comes regardless. There are moments, brief ones, when the kitchen is simply beautiful. When the afternoon light comes through the window at a particular angle and lands on the counter in a way that makes the ordinary objects on it look almost luminous. When the house is quiet and something on the stove is filling the room with a smell so deeply comforting, it seems to belong to something older than your own life. Some accumulated warmth passed down through every woman who ever stood at a stove and fed a family. When a child drifts in not because they need anything but just to be near you, and stands at the counter eating an apple, and you are both just there together in the warm room, saying nothing in particular. You will not remember these moments as monuments. They will not announce themselves as significant. They will just be Tuesday, or a Thursday afternoon in November, or a random morning in March. But they are in the kitchen with you, all of them, layered into the room the way smells layer into old wood, and they are part of what makes this room, for all its demands, the place where the life of the house actually lives. You wipe the counter for the third time today. Tomorrow you will wipe it again. When company is coming, the house undergoes a transformation that begins roughly 48 hours before their arrival, not because the house is ever truly dirty, but because company coming operates on a different standard than daily life, a standard in which every surface must be reconsidered and every room walked through with new eyes, imagining what a visitor might see rather than what you have long stopped noticing. The good dishes come down from the cabinet. The guest towels appear in the bathroom. A dessert is planned that you would not ordinarily make on a weeknight, something that requires an extra trip to the store or an extra hour in the kitchen, because company coming is a performance, and you are both its director and its principal performer. The first thing you do when company is confirmed is walk through the house slowly, room by room, with the particular kind of attention you normally reserve for the days before a holiday. You are looking for the things that familiarity has made invisible. The scuff on the baseboard near the front door that you stopped seeing 3 months ago. The window in the dining room that shows fingerprints in certain light. The shelf in the living room where the books have gradually migrated out of order. These are not failings exactly. They are the natural accumulation of a house that is actually lived in by actual people. But company will see them fresh, and you would rather they did not see them at all. The kitchen receives the most preparation, because the kitchen is where company will form their most lasting impression of you. Not because they will necessarily see it, though in this neighbourhood people move easily between the front rooms and the back of the house, but because what comes out of it will speak on your behalf for the entire evening. The menu is planned with a kind of strategic care that accounts for what the occasion requires, something that feels generous without being showy, something that demonstrates skill without calling attention to the effort. A roast is usually right. A roast says that time was given, that the occasion mattered, that the house has the resources and the woman running it knows how to use them. The dessert is the most considered decision of all. It needs to be something that can be made the day before, because the day of company is consumed by everything else. The cleaning, the table setting, the children who must be prepared to behave in ways that do not embarrass you. A layer cake, if you are feeling ambitious, or a pie with a crust that you are known for among the women in your circle, the crust that is always reliably flaky, that people mention when they are talking about your cooking in the way that people talk about such things. You make it Thursday evening after the dinner dishes are done, standing at the counter in the kitchen's late quiet, working the butter into the flour with your fingertips the way your mother taught you. by feel rather than by instruction. The table is set the morning of, not the everyday dishes and not the full formal china, but the good everyday, the set that comes out for birthdays and holidays and evenings when the occasion deserves something more than Tuesday. You press the tablecloth, you polish the serving pieces, you cut flowers from the backyard if anything is blooming, or arrange something from the grocery store into the low vase that lives at the back of the cabinet, the one bought specifically for the table, because the proportions are right and it does not obstruct the view across to the person sitting opposite. When your guests arrive and move through the front door into a house that smells of the roast and the candles you have lit on the table and the particular clean smell of a house that has been thoroughly attended to, what they experience is not the 48 hours of preparation behind it. They experience only the result, the warmth of the room, the table set just so, the food that arrives from the kitchen as though it appeared without effort. They will say something about how you make it look so easy, and you will say something gracious and deflecting, because that is what you have been taught to say, and because the alternative, explaining how much it actually cost, is not a conversation that fits the evening. You will clear the plates and return to the kitchen and begin the washing up while your husband and your guests linger over coffee, and you will do it with the same quiet competence with which you have done everything else today. The company will leave at 9:30. You will finish in the kitchen by 10. The good dishes will be dried by hand and returned to the cabinet where they wait for the next occasion. And by morning, the house will look as though nothing particularly remarkable happened here at all. There is a version of the 1950s housewife's life that gets told entirely in terms of charm and domesticity. The pretty apron, the warm kitchen, the cheerful competence with a casserole dish. That version is not wrong, but it leaves something out, something important, which is that the work itself was physically demanding in a way that the appliances of later decades would gradually reduce, but had not yet in 1953 fully addressed. You're on your feet for most of the day. You're lifting and carrying and bending and scrubbing. Your hands are in water multiple times before noon. The vacuum cleaner exists, and you are grateful for it. But it is not the lightweight machine it will eventually become. It is heavy and cumbersome, dragged from room to room by its cloth cord, and pushing it across the carpets and pulling it back requires the kind of sustained upper body effort that most people associate with work they would never call housework. You do it in segments, the living room first, then the hallway, then the bedrooms, moving the furniture as you go because the edges and corners matter, because a clean floor that has been cleaned only in the middle is not, by the standard you keep, a clean floor. The floors that are not carpeted must be swept and mopped. The kitchen linoleum and the bathroom tile and the entryway take the broom first, then the mop, and the mop requires wringing by hand if you do not have a wringer bucket, which many households do not. You fill the bucket, mop in long overlapping strokes, wring the mop between sections, refill the bucket when the water goes grey, which it does faster than you expect on a day when the children have been in and out through the back door. You work backward toward the door so you do not step on what you have just done, a simple logistical habit that you no longer consciously think about. The bathroom is a separate confrontation. The toilet, the tub, the tile grout, the sink, all of them cleaned on hands and knees with a brush, and something that smells strongly enough to indicate it is working. The tile in particular requires a kind of focused physical engagement, the brush angled into the grout lines and worked back and forth with enough pressure to make any difference, which means your wrist is doing something repetitive and sustained for the better part of 20 minutes. By the time you finish the bathroom on a Thursday deep clean day, your knees have been on the hard floor long enough to remind you they were there. The beds, stripped and remade on washing day, require a physical negotiation with mattresses and box springs that were not designed to be easy. The fitted sheet goes on first, worked around the corners of a mattress that is heavier than it appears, when you're trying to lift the corner of it with one hand while tucking the other. The top sheet must be pulled taut and mitered at the corners with the hospital fold you learned from your mother, a fold so precise that a coin dropped on the finished bed would, in theory, bounce. You do not test this. You simply know by the look of the finished surface whether it is right. By the time you sit down for the first time, genuinely sit down, it is past noon. Your feet have been on floors of various hardnesses since before 6 in the morning. Your back has performed the aggregate of 100 small bending and lifting motions that no single one of which seemed like much, but that together have left a low, steady ache in the place just above your hips. The neighbourhood operates as a kind of informal cooperative, a network of small exchanges and mutual attentions that holds the community together in ways that no official institution could replicate. You notice when the woman next door has not taken her trash cans in by Tuesday afternoon, which tells you something is wrong, and you ring her bell because that is what you do, because noticing and responding is the unspoken contract of living this close to other people's lives. When your youngest had a fever last February and you were out of aspirin, there were 3 women who could have helped within a 5-minute walk. That is not nothing. In a decade before urgent care clinics and late-night pharmacies, the neighbour across the street is a genuine resource. But the neighbourhood also watches. It watches with the comprehensive, unhurried attention of people who are home during the day and whose windows face the street, and who have internalized over years of proximity the rhythms and patterns of every household on the block. They know what time your husband leaves in the morning. They notice when your lights were on later than usual last night. They register, without necessarily meaning to, whether your front walk was swept this week, and whether the curtains in the front room have been changed recently, and whether your children came home from school in clean clothes or dirty ones. None of this is malicious mostly. It is simply what happens when lives are lived in close, sustained proximity. When the houses are near enough together that a conversation started from across a driveway can be conducted at a normal volume, when the backyards share a fence line and the children share a school bus, and the whole geography of daily life creates an intimacy that was not exactly chosen, but is genuinely felt. You're seen here, in a way that is simultaneously comforting and demanding, because being seen means being supported when things are hard, and it also means being measured against a standard that is collectively held and quietly enforced. The standard is domestic. It is almost always domestic. A woman who keeps a clean house and manages her children and puts a proper dinner on the table and presents herself appropriately when she steps outside is a woman who is holding up her end of the neighbourhood's unspoken agreement. A woman who visibly isn't is a subject of conversation that begins with concern and shades, if the situation persists, into something less charitable. You understand this. Everyone understands this. It is the water you swim in, and most of the time it does not feel like constraint. It feels like belonging. Because belonging is what it also gives you. Genuinely and without qualification. The woman who brings a casserole when you are sick does not bring it as a performance. She brings it because she has been brought casseroles herself, because the neighbourhood has agreed, in its quiet and binding way, that this is what is done, that people in difficulty should be fed, that no one should have to navigate a hard week entirely alone. The women on your block have sat with each other through difficult pregnancies and difficult husbands, and children who are struggling in school and parents who are aging in ways that required management, and they have done it without fanfare, without expectation of acknowledgement, simply because that is what neighbours do. You walk across the street on a Wednesday afternoon to return the muffin tin, and she asks you in for coffee, and you stay longer than you planned because the conversation goes somewhere real, the way conversations between people who trust each other sometimes do. And when you walk back across the street in the late afternoon light, you feel, briefly, the particular ease of someone who has been genuinely known. The neighborhood gave you that. Whatever else it costs, it also gives you that. The magazines arrive in the mailbox and they are beautiful. The photographs inside them show kitchens that gleam without apparent effort, children dressed without apparent struggle, women in shirtwaist dresses who appear to have slept without creasing their hair. The recipes are ambitious but presented as manageable. The cleaning tips are thorough but framed as quick. The overall message, delivered gently, consistently, across every glossy page, is that the well-run home is a reflection of the woman inside it, and that the well-run home is always, with the right attitude and the right products, within reach. You read them, most of them, most weeks, in the 20 minutes after the children are in bed, and before the tiredness catches up with you completely. You read them at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, turning the pages with the particular quality of attention that belongs to a person who is absorbing something for practical purposes, but also for something harder to name, a sense of participation, of connection to a larger world of women managing the same challenges with varying degrees of grace. The letters to the editor come from women in Ohio, and women in California, and women in small towns that you have never heard of and will never visit, and they are asking about the same things you're thinking about. How to make the pot roast stretch to Friday, how to manage a difficult child, how to keep the bathroom tile from going grey around the grout lines. The advice is confident in a way that sometimes comforts and sometimes quietly unsettles you. Use this product on your floors and they will shine. Serve this dish on Thursday and your husband will be pleased. Follow this schedule and your household will run smoothly. The confidence assumes a certain kind of life, a life where the product is available and affordable, where Thursday is not already complicated by something the schedule did not anticipate, where the floor can be attended to on the day the magazine suggests, because nothing else is claimed that day first. Your life does not always match these assumptions, and when it does not, the gap between the magazine's version and your own produces a small, familiar dissatisfaction that you have learned to set aside without examining too carefully, because the magazines are also genuinely useful. The recipe for the icebox cake that became a household staple came from a magazine. The tip about using vinegar on the windows came from a magazine. The pattern for the children's Halloween costumes that saved you $3 came from a magazine. You're not reading them passively or uncritically. You're reading them the way a practical person reads anything, taking what is useful and leaving the rest, or trying to. But the images stay with you in ways the recipes do not. The woman on the cover of this month's issue posed in her kitchen with a casserole dish and an expression of serene satisfaction, hair perfectly set, apron spotless, the kitchen behind her arranged as though it has never been touched by an actual meal in progress. You look at her and you understand, intellectually, that she is a model and the kitchen is a set, and the photograph was taken in a controlled environment that has nothing to do with Tuesday morning at 7:15. You understand this, and yet the image does something, plants something small and persistent, a comparison that runs in the background of your day like a low note you cannot quite identify. You're doing the same things she is doing in that photograph. You're in a kitchen, you're managing a household, you are, by any honest measure, managing it well. But you're also tired in a way the woman on the cover does not appear to be, and your hair has not been set since yesterday, and there is a dish towel over your shoulder that is not decorative, it is there because you need it, and the kitchen behind you at this particular moment looks like what it is. A room where work is being done by a person who has been doing it since early morning. The magazine will arrive again next month with another woman on the cover, just as serene, just as spotless. You will read it at the kitchen table after the children are in bed, and you will take what is useful and do your best with the rest. The paediatrician, the dentist, the school nurse who sends home a note about something that requires your attention, the class party that needs 3 dozen cookies by Thursday. The permission slip that got lost in the bottom of a school bag and resurfaces on the morning it was due. The child who has outgrown their shoes and the sibling who needs a winter coat before the weather turns. Managing the logistics of children's lives in a 1950s household is a task that has no clear beginning and no clear end. Only a continuous low hum of attention that runs beneath everything else you do. The calendar on the kitchen wall is not decorative. It is a working document, filled in your handwriting with appointments and due dates and reminders, the physical record of the organisational effort that keeps your children's lives running on schedule. You mark the dentist appointment 6 weeks out when you make it, because 6 weeks sounds like a long time until it is next Tuesday. You note the school play date in November that requires a costume, because November sounds distant in September and is not. You write down the piano lesson and the library book due date, and the afternoon when you promise to help with the bake sale, and the morning when your youngest has show and tell and has already decided, with great conviction, what the show and tell item will be, and you have written it down so you do not forget to have it ready. Appointments require preparation that begins before the day of the appointment. The night before the paediatrician, you check that everyone has clean clothes for the morning and that the insurance card is where it should be, and that you know how to get there efficiently, which in a town where you run errands on foot or by bus means knowing which bus and what time it leaves. You think through the questions you want to ask the doctor, because the time with the doctor is brief and moves quickly, and you will not remember everything unless you have gone over it beforehand. You arrive with children who are reasonably presentable and a mind that is organised, because the doctor's office is, like everything else, a place where you are representing your household and your competence. The school is a continuous source of small logistical demands that arrive without warning. The note in the book bag that says tomorrow is picture day and children should be dressed accordingly. The request for a donation of canned goods for a drive that ends Friday. The announcement of a half-day next Wednesday that you were not aware of, and that requires rapid rearrangement of a Wednesday that had already been planned. You absorb these disruptions with the adaptive efficiency of someone who has learned that the schedule is always to some degree provisional, that the best plan is the one that can be changed without collapsing. Clothing is its own ongoing project. Children grow in ways that do not respect the timing of the household budget, and a child who fit their school shoes in September may not fit them by November, and the shoes need to be replaced before the situation becomes obvious to everyone at school, because a child in too small shoes is something that reflects on you, in the particular way that visible domestic failures reflect on the woman who runs the household. You track the fit of things with the peripheral attention you apply to everything, noting when a hem is getting close to the knee and adjusting when a waistband starts to leave marks, planning a shopping trip before the need becomes urgent rather than after. Through all of this, you remain the single point of contact for every element of your children's external lives. The school calls you, the doctor calls you. The neighbours call you when one of your children has done something that requires a conversation. You carry the information about your children's health and their friendships and their academic progress and their growing and changing needs in a continuous, active awareness that has no off switch, because children do not stop needing things at 5 o'clock when the workday ends. There is no workday. There is only the day and the children in it, and the attention you give them without measuring it or naming it or expecting it to be acknowledged. You check the calendar before bed. Thursday's the dentist. You set out the insurance card. No one in 1955 is using the phrase emotional labour, but you are doing it. All of it. Every day, in quantities that would be difficult to measure and impossible to invoice. You are the person who notices when your husband comes home with something behind his eyes that means work was hard today. You are the person who knows which of your children is struggling with something they have not yet found words for. You're the person who smooths the small frictions of daily family life before they have a chance to become something larger, who manages the temperature of the household in ways that have nothing to do with the thermostat on the wall. You read the room the way you read everything else in this house, with a practiced, continuous, mostly unconscious attention that registers the difference between a silence that is comfortable and a silence that is waiting to become something difficult. When your husband is quiet at dinner, you know which kind of quiet it is. When your child answers a question with a shrug that is slightly too deliberate, you know the shrug is not the whole story. You have developed this fluency over years of close attention to the people in your care, and it is as real a skill as any other you bring to the running of this household, as real as knowing when the roast is done or when the pipes need looking at. But it is not one that anyone would think to mention when listing the things you do. The work of smoothing runs in all directions simultaneously. You manage the relationship between your children when it generates friction, which it does reliably and often, adjudicating disputes with enough fairness that neither child feels wronged, and enough firmness that the dispute actually ends. You manage the emotional weather between your husband and the household, absorbing the tension he carries home from work and redistributing it gently, giving him room to decompress without letting that decompression roll through the rest of the evening like weather. You manage your own emotional state with a discipline that is so complete it has become invisible even to you, setting aside frustration and tiredness, and the occasional loneliness of a day spent entirely inside the same four walls, in order to be fully present for whoever needs you next. The neighbour who stops by in the afternoon needing to talk about something that is worrying her receives your full attention and your genuine care, because she is your neighbour and her worry is real, and this is what neighbours do for each other, and also because part of you is relieved to be needed in this particular way, to be useful in a way that does not involve a scrub brush or a measuring cup. The conversation runs longer than either of you planned. You make tea. You listen in the way that makes a person feel heard rather than managed. By the time she leaves, something in her has settled, and you feel the particular quiet satisfaction of a thing done well that left no visible trace. Your children go to bed at the end of the day without knowing that you cried briefly in the kitchen at 2 p.m. for a reason you could not have fully articulated, or that you were worried about money in a way you did not bring to the dinner table, or that you had wanted at several points during the day simply to sit down and be still and have no one require anything of you for an hour. They go to bed knowing that dinner was good and the house was warm and their mother was there when they needed her, which is what they needed to know. You gave them that, deliberately, at cost. The cost is not calculated in 1955 in any ledger anyone keeps. It is simply absorbed, the way the house dress absorbs the day, invisibly and completely, until it is washed and made ready to absorb the next one. You check on the children before you go to bed. They are asleep, all of them, warm and completely unconcerned, which is exactly how you wanted them to be. You turn off the light. Saturday morning has a different quality to it than the rest of the week, a slightly looser texture, a small concession to the rhythm of human beings who have been at it since Monday. The children might sleep a little later. Your husband might linger over his coffee. The pressure of the school schedule lifts for 2 days, and in that small release there is something that functions, if not quite as rest, then at least as a different kind of effort, one with slightly more room in it. Saturday is when you address the things the week did not quite finish. The pile on the sewing chair, the window that needs washing, the call you have been meaning to return. The sewing chair is a particular kind of archaeological record, a physical accumulation of the week's small, unfinished intentions. There is a pair of your youngest trousers with a knee that needs patching, set aside Monday because the wash had to be finished first. There is a button from your husband's good shirt, one he mentioned 2 weeks ago, in the mild way that means he's noticed but is not pressing. and which you have been meaning to get to since the button itself appeared in your mending tin. There is a dress of your own with a hem that let go at the side seam, worn anyway because the week required it, and the hemline is only visible if you're looking for it, and now it is Saturday and you're looking for it. The sewing takes most of the morning if you let it, and you usually let it, because mending done properly takes time, and because rushing it produces results that are visible in a way that a mended garment is not supposed to be visible. The patch on the knee sitting slightly off grain, the button replaced at a height that is close, but not exact. You do it right because doing it right means not doing it again for a good long while, and the economy of your time operates on that principle throughout. Your husband takes the children somewhere, if the weather permits, or occupies them in the yard while you work, which is its own kind of support, unspoken and unremarkable and genuinely valuable. The house is quieter on Saturday morning than on any weekday morning, a relative quiet, not silence but the particular absence of the school day urgency that drives the household from 6 until 8 with the implacable force of an external schedule. No bus to meet, no lunches to make against the clock, just the morning and the sewing and the sounds of the neighbourhood settling into its weekend rhythm. The window washing, if you get to it, is a task that transforms the room you do it in. Windows you stopped seeing clearly weeks ago suddenly deliver the backyard to you in crisp, legible detail, the maple tree in full colour, the fence line, the neighbour's garden, the sky above the rooftops wider and bluer than it seemed through the dimness of the previous week's glass. You wash them with vinegar and old newspaper, a method passed down with the quiet authority of something tested over time, and you polish them until the light comes through clean and undistorted. It is one of those chores that is disproportionately satisfying relative to the effort it requires, and you feel the satisfaction plainly and without apology. By noon, the sewing pile is reduced, the windows are done, and the call has been returned. The house holds the particular orderliness of a Saturday morning well spent, not the deep formal cleanliness of a Thursday after deep cleaning day, but something more lived in and genuine, the tidiness of a place where someone has moved through thoughtfully and put things right without making a production of it. Your husband comes in from the backyard with the children trailing behind him, all of them pink-cheeked from the cold, and he pours himself more coffee and says something about lunch, and you're already thinking about what is in the icebox, already sliding back into the week's rhythm, which does not really pause, not completely, not even on Saturday. But for a few hours this morning, the house was yours, in a way it rarely is. You made good use of it. It would be dishonest, and it would miss something true about this era, to describe the 1950s housewife's life as entirely exhausting and nothing else. Because alongside the relentlessness, alongside the physical toll and the invisible labour and the standards that arrive from every direction, there was also something real, something that the later decades would sometimes struggle to name without either sentimentalising or dismissing it. And that was the quiet, genuine satisfaction of a thing done well. The made bed with its hospital corners, the swept floor that catches the morning light, the dinner on the table at 6, hot, complete, exactly what was needed. This satisfaction is not the same as happiness, and it is not the same as fulfillment in the larger sense, but it is real, it is its own thing, and it deserves to be seen clearly. There is a specific pleasure that belongs to a bed made properly, a pleasure that is partly aesthetic and partly the satisfaction of a physical task completed with care, and it is available to you every morning if you are willing to receive it on its own terms, which is to say, not as a metaphor for anything larger, not as evidence of oppression or contentment or anything else, but simply as a bed that has been made well, and looks the way a well-made bed looks, and will be made again tomorrow. The swept floor is similar. In a house where the floors are hardwood or linoleum, where the children track things in from outside and the cooking produces crumbs, and the day generates its ordinary detritus. A swept floor is a thing that was not and then is, a visible before and after created by 20 minutes of effort and a good broom. You sweep with the broom your mother gave you when you set up your first household, a broom that still has good bristles if you take care of it, and you work from the far end of the room toward the door, gathering everything into a pile with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this enough times that the motion is clean and unhurried and almost automatic. The pile goes into the dustpan, the floor is what it should be. On the mornings when all of this comes together, when the beds are made and the floors are swept and the kitchen is clean and the laundry is on the line and the smell of something good is already beginning in the pot on the back of the stove, there is a moment, usually brief, usually somewhere around 9:30 when the house has been put right and the day has not yet reasserted its demands, when the whole of it lands on you with a completeness that is genuinely pleasurable. The house is doing what a house should do. The household is running. You made it so. Your mother found this satisfaction and her mother before her, and it was passed to you not as ideology but as practice, lived through observation and gradual absorption over years of watching the household run and learning its requirements. When you were a child, you thought it was simply how things were. When you became the one running the household yourself, you began to understand what it had actually cost her, and to find, alongside that understanding, a real respect for the competence it represented, none of which makes the work less relentless, or the standards less demanding, or the invisibility of it less real. A swept floor will need sweeping again tomorrow. A made bed will be unmade tonight. The dinner that was complimented will be expected again in 24 hours. The cycle does not pause to acknowledge itself, but within the cycle there are these moments, small and specific and genuine, where the work produces something you can see and feel clearly, and the feeling is good. You smooth the last corner of the bedspread with your hand. It falls straight. The room looks the way you want it to look. For a moment, that is simply enough. In 1955, the cultural conversation about women's lives is, with very few exceptions, not a conversation about possibility. It is a conversation about refinement, about doing better what has already been decided you will do. The women's magazines do not ask whether you want to be a housewife. They ask which casserole dish will make you a better one. The neighbours do not ask whether the role fits. They ask whether you're keeping up with it. The question of what you might want beyond the house, beyond the children, beyond the 6 o'clock dinner and the Tuesday ironing, is not a question that has been given respectable space yet in the mainstream of American domestic life. Some women do not feel this as a constraint. This is true, and it deserves to be said plainly. There are women in your neighbourhood who are genuinely and without ambivalence satisfied by the life they are living, who find in the running of a household a richness and a purpose that requires no supplement, who would not trade their Tuesday afternoons for anything an office or a classroom might offer. Their contentment is not false consciousness or failure of imagination. It is real, it is valid, and it represents one honest way of inhabiting the role. But there are also women who feel, at intervals, a restlessness that the available vocabulary does not quite accommodate. Not unhappiness, not precisely, not ingratitude. Something more like the awareness of a dimension that is present but unused, a capability that goes past the edge of what the daily life requires and has nowhere further to go. You might have been good at something. You were good at something before the house and the children and the complete absorption of your days into other people's needs. You do not say this out loud, mostly. There is not, in 1955, a natural place to say it that would be received without discomfort. The mechanisms that enforce the limits of the role are mostly social, mostly invisible, mostly carried by the accumulated weight of expectation rather than by anything so legible as a rule. A woman who expresses ambition towards something outside the home risks being understood as dissatisfied with what she has, which is to say, dissatisfied with her husband, her children, her household, all of which reflect on others and not only on herself. A woman who takes a part-time job for reasons beyond financial necessity is the subject of a conversation about whether the home is being properly attended to. A woman who goes back to school is remarkable enough to be talked about on the block, in tones that balance admiration with mild unease. The few women who push against the edges of the role in this era do so mostly quietly, finding the supplement they need in the margins of the life that has been arranged for them. The one who runs the church committee with an efficiency that would serve a corporation well. The one who takes the correspondence course by mail and never mentions it at coffee. The one who writes, not for publication, just writes, in a notebook she keeps in the linen closet behind the good towels, because something in her requires the outlet and she's found the only place in the household's geography where the outlet fits. The decade will shift. The conversation will change, slowly and then rapidly, in ways that no one standing in a 1955 kitchen can fully anticipate. The women who come after will have different options and different constraints, different freedoms and different losses, and they will look back at this era with a mixture of feelings that includes gratitude for what changed and something more complicated about what was given up. But that is later. Right now it is Tuesday afternoon in 1955, and the ironing is almost done, and the children will be home in an hour and dinner needs thinking about. You press the last shirt smooth, you hang it carefully, you move on to the next thing. Sunday dinner is the meal that means the most, and it begins in a way that no weeknight dinner does, with time. Time to plan it properly, time to start the roast in the late morning, to let it go slow in the oven while the family comes home from church and the children change their clothes and the house settles into the particular Sunday afternoon quiet that is different from all other quiet. The smell of it fills the rooms by noon, that deep, slow smell of meat and root vegetables and something caramelizing at the edges of the pan, and it is an announcement as much as it is a meal. An announcement that says the week is bookended here, that there is a ritual, that the family comes together, that the table matters. You put the roast in before you leave for church. This is the calculation of Sunday morning. The timing worked out so that the oven does its long, unhurried work while the family is elsewhere. So that you return to a house that has been quietly preparing something good in your absence. The smell reaching you before you are fully through the door, wrapping around the cold air you carry in from outside. You hang up the children's good coats, you send them upstairs to change, and you go to the kitchen, not because anything urgent needs doing yet, but because the kitchen on a Sunday afternoon is the centre of a gravity you're always pulled toward. The roast requires attention of a different kind than a weeknight meal. Not urgent attention, not the focused, time-pressured monitoring of a dish that needs to be finished by 6, but the slower, more generous attention of someone with the luxury of checking in, of basting, of lifting the lid and letting the steam rise and evaluating, by smell and by the colour of the liquid pooling at the bottom of the pan, how things are progressing. You add a splash of water when it needs it. You turn the carrots. You check the potatoes which went in an hour after the roast, and press them gently with a fork to measure their resistance. This is cooking as a different kind of conversation, one conducted without urgency, in the language of heat and time and the slow transformation of raw ingredients into something that will sit at the centre of the table and hold the family around it for the better part of an hour. Weeknight dinners are necessary and you make them well, but they are produced under pressure, assembled against the clock, their virtues those of efficiency and competence. Sunday dinner is something else. It is the meal where you have enough time to do it the way it deserves to be done, and you use that time fully, without guilt, without the nagging sense of other tasks waiting. The table is set differently on Sunday. The good cloth comes out, pressed smooth from the linen closet. The everyday dishes are left in the cabinet and the ones reserved for occasions take their place. Not the full formal china, which is for Christmas and Easter, but the set that sits between ordinary and ceremonial, the one that says this meal was considered. You set it before the children come down from changing, in the quiet of the early afternoon, arranging each place with the small, deliberate care that is its own form of welcome. A message laid in linen and silverware that says you're expected here and your presence matters. Your husband comes through the kitchen on his way from the living room, pauses at the stove, lifts the lid, and looks in with the approving expression of a man who understands, in a general way, that something good is being made and that it will be ready when it is ready. He says something appreciative, replaces the lid carefully and moves on. This exchange, small and routine and thoroughly unremarkable, is a version of something that happens in thousands of kitchens on thousands of Sunday afternoons across the country. A tiny domestic moment so common it barely registers as a moment at all, and yet it is, in its quiet way, one of the stitches that holds a marriage together over decades. The children drift in and out of the kitchen the way children do on Sunday afternoons, not hungry yet, but drawn by the smell, orbiting the stove with a hopeful, slightly restless energy of people waiting for something they know is coming. You give them small tasks if they ask. The youngest allowed to stir something or carry the bread basket to the table, the older one trusted with the butter dish and the salt and pepper, each small assignment a version of inclusion, a way of making them part of the making rather than merely the receiving. When the meal is finally on the table, when the roast has been rested and carved and arranged on the platter and the vegetables are in their dishes, and the gravy has been made from the pan drippings with the care it deserves, and everyone is seated and the house smells like the best version of itself, there is a moment before the first serving is passed when everything is simply as it should be. The family is together. The table is full. The afternoon is still and unhurried and entirely contained within the four walls of the house. You have made this, not just the meal, though the meal is real and good and was hours in the making. You have made the conditions for this moment, the warmth of the room, the readiness of the table, the smell that drew everyone to their seats without being asked. That is never just cooking. It never was. When a child gets sick in a 1950s household, the house does not pause. The work shifts, reorganizes itself around the new demand, accommodates, but it does not stop. You bring soup and cool cloths and the thermometer from the medicine cabinet, and you track temperatures through the night with one part of your attention, while another part is already calculating which of tomorrow's plans will need to be rescheduled and which cannot be. Your own sickness is a more complicated matter. There is no such thing, really, as a sick day when you are the one who runs the house. You reduce your pace, you manage rather than accomplish. You get through the day and hope to feel better tomorrow. The sick child changes the texture of every hour. A child who woke up feverish and has been on the sofa since morning requires a kind of presence that is different from the ordinary presence of a weekday. You're checking on them between tasks, reading temperatures at regular intervals, coaxing fluids in small patient increments, because a sick child often does not want to drink and the wanting must be encouraged without pressure. The soup goes on the stove by mid-morning, made from the stock in the icebox that was put up last week from the chicken carcass, because homemade soup is what you give a sick child, and because the making of it is something you can do while staying close, something that produces a result that is genuinely useful. The other children still need managing. The well ones require the same breakfasts and lunches and pickups and redirections as any other day, and the presence of a sick sibling in the household introduces its own complications. The curiosity, the disruption to the afternoon's normal geography, the possibility of transmission that you are already calculating in the back of your mind, already thinking about whether to keep the school clothes separate and the dishes washed with extra care. You move through the day with a divided attention that becomes, by necessity, its own kind of competence. The night with a sick child is the hardest part. You check them at midnight and again at 2, pressing the back of your hand to a forehead that may be cooler than it was or may not be, making the judgment in the dark with the thermometer and your own accumulated knowledge of what this child's fever looks and feels like at its various stages. If the temperature rises, you know what you will do, and when the doctor will need to be called, and you hold that knowledge quietly, without sharing it, because a worried child sleeps less and you need them to sleep. You sit on the edge of the bed in the dark for a few minutes, listening to their breathing settle, before you go back to your own room. Your own illness operates under a completely different set of rules, which is to say, almost none. A headache is managed with aspirin and the continuation of the day. A cold is managed with the same aspirin and a slightly reduced pace, and the quiet internal calculation of what must be done regardless, and what can wait until tomorrow. Nausea is managed by standing still for a moment at the kitchen counter and breathing carefully and then continuing. You have developed, over years of running a household through every kind of circumstance, a high tolerance for functioning through discomfort, not because you are made of exceptional material, but because the house and the family it contains do not have another option on the days when you are the only one available to manage them. There is a particular loneliness to being sick and irreplaceable. Other workers have colleagues who cover for them. Other workers have sick days that are legitimate and acknowledged and built into the structure of their employment. Your employment has no such structure. If you are ill, the breakfast is still made, the children are still dressed for school, the house is still managed at a level sufficient to keep everyone in it functional and fed, because that is what the day requires regardless of how you feel while you're doing it. Your mother moved through her sick days the same way. You watched her do it as a child without fully understanding what you were watching, and now you understand completely. And some mornings when you're pushing through the second day of something that should probably have had you in bed, you think of her, and the thought is not quite comfort but is something close to it. By Thursday the child is better. Sitting up and eating, the colour returned to their face, the particular animation of a child who's been still for 2 days and is now ready to be in motion again. You change the bed linens, air the room, take the thermometer back to the medicine cabinet. The house absorbs the interruption and reassembles around its ordinary rhythm. You make a note to pick up more aspirin on Wednesday. The sewing machine in the spare room or the corner of the bedroom is not decorative. It is a tool, and you know how to use it the way you know how to use all the tools of the household, with a competence that was taught and then practiced until it became second nature. You sew your children's Halloween costumes and let out the seams of a dress that can still be saved, and hem the curtains for the new window, and make a set of aprons from a remnant of fabric that was too good to throw away. The ability to make and mend is not a hobby in 1955. It is a form of domestic economy, a way of making the household's resources go further, and it carries its own quiet pride. The sewing machine is a singer, or something very like one, a heavy black machine with a gold decal along the arm and a foot pedal that you operate with a particular rocking pressure that took a few months to calibrate and now feels as natural as driving. The sound of it running is specific and domestic, a fast mechanical rhythm that fills the room in a way that is not unpleasant, that sounds like something being made, which is exactly what is happening. You can hear it from other rooms, and the children have learned that the sound of the sewing machine means you are occupied but not unreachable, available for genuine emergencies and not for questions that can wait. The fabric lives in a basket or a box or a dedicated shelf, sorted loosely by type and colour. Remnants kept because a remnant that is too small for a dress may be exactly right for a pocket or a patch, or the trim on a child's blouse. You do not throw away fabric that has anything left to offer. This is not miserliness. It is the practical sensibility of someone who has learned that the piece you discarded is almost always the piece you needed 3 weeks later, and that the economy of the household is better served by keeping and organising than by the temporary tidiness of throwing away. Mending is a different skill from sewing, more focused, more intimate with individual garments, more dependent on judgment about what a piece of clothing is worth and what it will take to return it to service. A worn elbow can be patched if the patch is cut from a complementary fabric and applied with care, and the result is a garment with more life in it, and a patch that is, if done well, almost invisible, or at least not embarrassing, which in the economy of 1955 clothing amounts to the same thing. A seam that has let go is 5 minutes of work on the machine if you catch it before it goes further, and catching it before it goes further is a matter of paying attention to the clothes in the household with the same ongoing peripheral awareness you bring to everything else. There is a craft to this work that goes beyond its practical function, a satisfaction in the making that is distinct from the satisfaction of a clean floor or a finished casserole. When you sew your daughter's dress from a simplicity pattern, cutting the pieces carefully and pinning them according to the instructions and running them through the machine and pressing each seam flat as you go and finishing the hem by hand with small, even stitches, you are making something that did not exist before you made it, something that will be worn and washed and worn again, and that will have your work in it in a way that is real and specific and entirely yours. The domestic arts carry identity in this era in a way that is hard to fully articulate but is understood by every woman who practices them. The woman known for her pie crust, the woman who makes her children's clothes, the woman whose needlework is displayed in the living room and admired by the women who visit. These are reputations built on skill that was developed over years of patient practice, and they are understood in the community as a form of character, evidence of the kind of woman you are and the kind of household you keep. You finish the last seam of the apron, trim the threads, and hold it up. The fabric is a small blue check, bought on sale at the end of summer, and the apron is simple and well made and will last for years if you take care of it. You made this from almost nothing. In the arithmetic of this household, that matters more than it might sound. Before you finally allow yourself to sit down for the last time at the end of the day, you walk through the house. It is not a conscious decision, exactly. It is simply what you do, a final circuit through the rooms, turning off lights, checking the door, picking up the thing someone left on the stairs, looking in on the children one more time. You move through the house in the dark, familiar with every creak and shadow, and you register in a way that has become so habitual it barely feels like noticing anymore. The state of things. Whether the kitchen is as it should be, whether the living room has been straightened, whether the house is ready in its quiet way to receive morning. The living room is the first room you pass through. In the dim light from the hallway, it looks the way a well-kept room looks at the end of a day, settled, composed. The throw pillow returned to its place on the sofa. The magazine your husband was reading squared to the edge of the side table. The lamp turned off. Nothing here requires your attention, which registers not as a conscious thought, but as a small unnoticed release of tension, the absence of a problem, which in the running of a household is its own form of good news. The kitchen is last because the kitchen is always last, because you have already been through it once after dinner, but there is always something that presents itself on the second pass. The glass left on the counter by a child who came down for water, the dish towel that slipped from its bar, the window you meant to latch before the temperature dropped and did not. You move through it in the near dark, making the small corrections by feel and by the low light coming through the window from the street, your hands finding what they need without your eyes having to search. The counter gets one more pass with the cloth. The dish towel goes back on its bar straight. The light above the stove, left on at low as a nighttime courtesy, is the last light you adjust. The children's rooms are the most important stop on this circuit, and they are the stop where something in you slows and gentles in a way that the rest of the walk does not. You open each door quietly, the way you have opened these doors hundreds of times, and you stand for a moment in the threshold, letting your eyes adjust to the darker dark inside. Each child is a shape under blankets, breathing at the particular depth and rhythm of deep sleep, the face slack and young, and entirely without the day's accumulated concerns. You pull a blanket up where it has slipped. You retrieve the stuffed animal that has migrated to the floor. You do these things without waking them, with the particular silence of someone who's been doing this long enough that every creak of the floorboard is known and avoidable. Standing in a child's doorway at the end of the day is a thing that cannot be entirely reduced to function, though it contains function. Yes, you're checking on them. Yes, you're making sure the blanket is adequate and the window is not drafty and everything is as it should be. But you're also simply present with them in the quiet, watching them sleep in the way that parents have watched their children sleep across all of history, with a mixture of love and relief and the particular tenderness that is available only at the end of a day when everyone made it through. The house is as it should be. The doors are locked, the stove is off, the lights are out in every room except the one low bulb above the stove that will burn until morning. You have made your final circuit and found nothing requiring action, which is the best possible outcome of this walk, which is, in the end, less a task than a ritual, a way of closing the day formally, of satisfying yourself that the household is secure and complete and ready for what comes next. You go to bed. The house settles around you. The small sounds of a structure contracting in the cooling night air, the furnace cycling on in the basement, the branch of the maple brushing the window in the wind. These sounds are the sounds of your life, absorbed so deeply into the background of your awareness that you no longer hear them as sounds, only as the texture of a night in your own house, quiet and familiar and entirely safe. Tomorrow the alarm will go before 6. The percolator will be the first thing you think of, and the house will receive you again, as it always does, as it always has, ready to begin. There are no monuments to the women who made these houses run, no archives of their daily schedules, no records of the thousands of meals they prepared, the thousands of loads of laundry they washed, the thousands of small crises they quietly resolved before anyone else in the family knew there had been a crisis at all. History tends to remember the dramatic and the documented, the speeches and the battles and the decisions made in rooms with important furniture. It does not, as a rule, remember the woman standing at the kitchen sink at 7 in the evening, the dishes done, the children in bed, the house finally still, who looked out the window at the darkened backyard and simply stood there for a moment, in the quiet, before turning off the light. And yet that woman, repeated across millions of households, across decades, across the full geographic breadth of 1950s America, made something. Not the kind of something that gets entered into ledgers, or cited in histories, or commemorated with a plaque on a building, but something real nonetheless. She made the conditions in which children grew up feeling secure. She made the daily life of a family function with a smoothness that everyone inside it depended on, and almost no one fully understood. She made, out of ordinary materials and ordinary hours, and the kind of effort that does not announce itself, a life that had warmth and structure, and the particular coherence of a place where someone was paying attention. The things she knew how to do were not simple. They presented themselves as simple, were described as simple, were assumed by the culture around her to be simple, which is one of the ways that expertise disguises itself when it belongs to women in domestic settings. But the management of a household budget that must stretch without breaking, the timing of a meal with 4 components that must all be ready at the same moment, the reading of a child's emotional state across the dinner table, and the quiet intervention that addresses it before it becomes something requiring more, the maintenance of a marriage through the accumulated ordinary friction of years lived in close quarters. None of this is simple. All of it is skill, developed through practice and sustained through application, day after day, in rooms where no one was keeping score. What she did not always have was language for her own experience, the vocabulary for talking about domestic labour as labour, for naming the emotional work alongside the physical work, for describing the cost of the invisibility itself. That vocabulary was still a decade or more away, being assembled quietly by women who are living the same life she was, and beginning, in the margins of it, to write. When the language finally arrived, it arrived to describe something that had been true for a very long time, that the work of the household was work, that the woman who did it was a worker, that the absence of a paycheck did not make the effort less real, or the skill less genuine, or the exhaustion less earned. She would have recognized herself in that description. Some of her would have resisted it, because the pride she took in what she did was real, and she did not experience it only as burden. Both of these things are true simultaneously, and the truest account of her life holds both without forcing them to resolve. What she deserves, beyond the language and the recognition, is the specific kind of remembering that honours the texture of ordinary experience rather than only its outcomes. Not the housewife as symbol, not the housewife as cautionary tale or golden ideal, but the actual woman standing at the actual kitchen sink at 7 p.m, tired in a specific way that belonged to a specific kind of day, looking out at a backyard she knew as well as she knew anything in the world, feeling whatever she was feeling in that moment, which was complicated and real and entirely her own. She stood there for a moment, then she turned off the light and walked through the dark house and checked on her children and went to bed. And in the morning she began again. That is the legacy of the ordinary. Not grand, not simple, not fully visible even now, but continuous and essential, and built from the materials of a single human life given over, day after day, to the work of making a home. It deserves to be remembered, exactly as it was. So tonight, as you settle in, think about the woman who stood at that kitchen sink, the one who was up before 6, who made the coffee while the house was still sleeping, who moved through her day with a competence so complete it looked like ease. She did not think of herself as remarkable. She thought of herself as someone with a roast to put on and a floor to sweep, and children who needed their lunches packed before the bus came. She was just living, and in the living of it, she made something that mattered more than she ever stopped to measure. The 1950s housewife's life was not a simple thing, and we have tried tonight to see it clearly. The work and the weight and the warmth of it, the pride and the exhaustion, and the quiet joys that existed alongside both. These were real women, in real kitchens, doing work that was real, and they did it with a care and a consistency that the people around them depended on every single day, without always knowing they were depending on it. If there is something to carry forward from all of this, perhaps it is simply the practice of noticing the ordinary moments before they are finished, the morning light in the kitchen, the smell of something good on the stove, the particular quiet of a house where everyone you love is safe and sleeping. These things were available to the women of that era, and they are available to you now. And they do not require the perfect house, or the pressed tablecloth, or the 6 o'clock dinner to be worth receiving. Slow down just slightly when something is good. Notice it. That is enough. That has always been enough. Good night.